Cropper's Nogales Auto Center, your local dealer of Chevy, Buick, and GMC. The best place to find the newest, award-winning Chevy, Buick, and GMC models. But there's more. Cropper's also provides professional certified service, parts, and a full-service body shop and collision center. Come on over and see for yourself everything Cropper's has to offer. Located at 1831 North Grand Avenue, Nogales, Arizona. www.croppercare.com, 520-762-6446.
Listo. Buenas tardes, Nogalenses. Welcome back. We were out for a week, but we're back, and we're here with Scott Vandervoet, chairman of the Fresh Produce Association, here to talk about some pretty important stuff, especially for this community. And we're going to talk about our 1-year anniversary. We've been around for 1 year. People, can you believe it? It's pretty exciting. I'm excited. First, we're going to take a quick break to thank our sponsors, and we'll be right back. All right. We'll see you in a second. Right here. All right, so we want to, again, thank you to all of our sponsors, the people who make this show happen, and to all of you viewers. Real quick, we're going to, before we get on the news, I want to touch on a couple things. One is from the next week is the Nogales Bicycle Classic, and a couple of episodes ago, we had a contest on Arizona's birthday, a month ago, actually. We had a contest where we asked people questions about Arizona, and we announced the winners the following week, and we have your prizes. So if you want to get your prizes, which is, ¿qué eran, Edgardo?
470, 5206.
No, pero it's the 2 passes for $14 for entry fee, to cover your entry fee. And a copy of my first book, Conflict to Secure a Nation, for the 3rd place. To get your prizes, call 470, ¿qué era? 470? 5206. That's 520-470-5206. And that's to get your prizes. So the next thing that we want to mention also is Rudy Molera, from the county, the county supervisor, Rudy Bugs Molera. He had a pretty bad bike accident. Was it yesterday, right? A few days ago that he had the bike accident. And we want to wish him well. We hope you get well, Bugs. He was our guest not too long ago also, and that was a pretty fun interview. All right, so how's it going, Scott?
Everything's good. I'm happy to be here, Joe.
I'm happy to have you here. You know, I mean, I haven't seen you very much over the last year since I haven't been with the Fresh Produce Association, but it's good to see you here.
My pleasure.
Now, a couple of things that we're going to talk about. We're going to jump into the news now. As you know, the Senate voted today on the national emergency declaration, and they voted to block it 59-41. Our own Kristen Sinema, she voted, for blocking the declaration, and McSally, not surprising, voted for the declaration. So we're in a national emergency. How's that feel? Living on the border in a national emergency.
I'm still looking for it.
Yeah. I remember it was last week or the week before that there was the tunnel collapse right there in the Century Lane. And I posted the article from the International, and somebody commented, so there's not a national emergency? Like that one situation was proof that we live in a national emergency. And my response to that is, the reason for the national emergency is to build the wall, correct? He hasn't hidden that fact. It's been very open that he wants to build a wall quicker, and, he wants his money for it. But is a wall going to stop a tunnel?
Well, I think the tunnel sheds some light on some of the real issues, which is aging infrastructure.
Oh, absolutely.
Specifically at ports of entry, such as the DeConcini Port of Entry, so important, especially to our community.
Absolutely.
And is there an emergency in respect to some of the old infrastructure, whether it be here in Nogales or at Douglas? Perhaps. I don't know if emergency is the right word, but there definitely needs to be attention to those facilities to ensure that people and goods can move through efficiently, securely, and that trade and commerce can continue on between our two communities.
Yeah, as somebody who does cross-border trade, you recognize that there are other issues that money needs to be invested in as opposed to a wall or, not that border security shouldn't be invested in, but it needs to be approached from a different standpoint than just build a wall and that'll fix everything.
I think within the trade community and the business community and as residents of Nogales, Arizona, Nogales, Sonora, we all recognize the fact that we need staffing. You can have a beautiful piece of infrastructure as a port of entry, but if you don't have adequate staffing, you're not going to be able to take advantage of that,
Absolutely.
Of the port of entry.
Well, the wait times, I would think, walking over to the United States right now, Edgardo and I were talking about it this morning, and it's like 2-hour wait just to walk across. Yeah. And staffing can help that move more quickly. And then when it comes to the trucks, I know it was a couple of years ago at the association's convention, there was a presentation about streamlining the truck x-rays and stuff like that. And I don't know if there's ever have any plans. I know they're doing the cold storage finally, but if there's any plans in the future to add that to the infrastructure of the port.
So one of the topics that we talk about a lot is NII, non-intrusive inspection, using different forms of technology to look at the security and the integrity of a commercial load in the form of a semi-truck or a trailer. What does that do for you? It, one, expedites the process. it takes some of the human error out of it, and that doesn't mean that technology is perfect.
No,
but the more tools you can use, I think, is of benefit to all of us.
And you need to constantly innovate, because smugglers are constantly innovating. And if you build a wall, they'll find a way over or under it. If anything that you do, they'll innovate. So money needs to be spent on innovation to counter what they do.
The other point is that the ports of entry are used as smuggling routes. Drugs and illicit contraband does not exclusively go around the ports of entry.
No,
much of it goes right down the middle. So
the largest fentanyl bust just happened here at our port.
Right.
I mean, it's crazy.
So within the Produce Association and binational trade, we're very interested in improving not only the infrastructure itself, the buildings, but also ensuring that we have proper staffing and proper technology.
Absolutely. Now, jumping right from that into the wire, I mean, our wire's been up since November, really, is when they first put it up, right? Right around Thanksgiving. And we've had it since then. Our Mayor Arturo Garino, he challenged the additional wire that they put in, right there on Morley, head to toe. And I was talking to the mayor's office today about what's been going on with that, because they made it, it was this really, really big deal for a week or two, and then it started to slowly die down. And I asked if anything's happened, and apparently they are still meeting with cities around the state to get back up for. And Tucson already declared their support. Bisbee declared their support. They had a meeting today in Benson with a bunch of other cities, and they're going to put it on next month's agenda to vote to whether or not to support. Sierra Vista, on the other hand, they voted not to support us. And it's, it's a matter of the demographic, I guess you could say, of where the people are and how they decide to vote.
One of the issues what came to light after Mayor Garino took that issue head on was the decision-making process between the agencies that are in charge of the ports versus Border Patrol between the ports.
Absolutely.
And I think it wasn't clear to a lot of people. We saw members of the military participating in that process of putting up the wire, and many people thought that the Department of Defense was involved in some of that decision-making. We saw what's referred to as hardening of the ports. Containers and wire were placed.
Operation Secure Line, right? That was the official name of the operation, I believe.
And some of that has since been removed.
Yeah.
So while you see the wire going up and more wire going up at the ports themselves, we saw hardening, and then we saw it taken away.
Yeah, because they blocked off the lanes, and then they removed those crates, which is good for cross-border traffic. That's great. But the downtown shopping district is still suffering from not just the image, but I mean it's dangerous to have that kind of stuff. So I mean, head to toe. And I guess we'll still have to see. I'll keep you guys posted on that story. I mean, you guys know that I'm tracking this story. I've been tracking it from the beginning, and we'll see where it goes. I mean, who knows? It can go anywhere at this point. We also want to say congratulations to Daniel Rodriguez. Did you hear about Daniel Rodriguez, the young man who won the Patriots essay.
The essay contest, yes.
Yeah, the essay contest for the VFW. Now, Joe Diaz, he runs the VFW. He told me about this more than a month ago. And I broke the story here, and then I didn't find out until a week later when I spoke to the boy's mom that the press wasn't supposed to talk about it yet. So we broke the story before it was supposed to be broken, but congratulations, Daniel. He's the first one from Arizona to ever win this contest. So it's a pretty big deal. And I'm sure he's enjoying spring break. I mean, you've got kids, right? Are your kids on spring break?
I have a young daughter. She's still in preschool.
She's still in preschool.
But she's also on spring break.
Yeah. So how's that going at home? Because I've got an 8-year-old and he's in second grade, and I love the kid so much, but I'm ready for him to go back to school. Edgardo, I mean, he's got 2 daughters. It's got to be even worse for him than it is for me. They're one of them's a teenager. Well, he's got 4 kids really that he's got to deal with. He's got the 2 boys and 2 girls, and he's got to deal with teenagers. And I'm so afraid when my son becomes a teenager. I'm terrified of it. I was a horrible teenager. I don't know how you were.
Well, I think when the kids are at home for those days and the hours that we're not used to them, it's an opportunity, but at the same time, it reminds us how important teachers are and school is.
Absolutely. Teachers are very important, which is a whole nother conversation we can get into, especially, I mean, that's something that I wanted to mention, and I wasn't sure if I should, but, you know, the state legislature met recently, and they voted on things like our state drink is now lemonade, whether or not to remove the word milk from almond milk, but they actively avoided the subject of teachers and teachers' pay, which I think is disappointing revelation. I mean, the revelation really happened during the Red for Ed last year, when they were basically snuck out of the state capitol to avoid the protests. So it wasn't that surprising, but it's still disappointing. Expect better of you, state. But we'll see. Hopefully, hopefully they don't end up canceling school again this year for weeks on time like they did last time, because that was worse than spring break.
And you know, I think ultimately it's a budget issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's very contentious. We have a governor and members of the legislature who have campaigned on not raising taxes and maintaining the budget, and that's valid, and
absolutely.
I respect that. But I think of all the things that the state's responsible for funding, education has to be at the top of the list.
It should be, absolutely. And I'm not in charge of running any budget, and nor should I be. I'm terrible at running budgets, but and it has to be difficult to figure out, you know, where to take money from to put this. But I mean, government spending as a whole, I mean, that has a history of being reckless and I don't know. I mean, Arizona's budgetary practices might be a little bit better than other states, but like you said, education should be at the top of the list. I mean, especially in a state where we've been low on the education totem pole for a really long time.
Yeah, we have a lot of improvements to make.
Mm-hmm.
And the other way to think about it is you're funding your future. You're spending on your future.
Absolutely.
So what better investment?
Exactly. I agree 100%. All right, so we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about the tomato suspension agreement and why some rich, politically connected Florida landowners have a problem with Mexican tomatoes. We'll be right back.
Cropper's Nogales Auto Center, your local dealer of Chevy, Buick, and GMC. The best place to find the newest, award-winning Chevy, Buick, and GMC models. But there's more. Cropper's also provides professional certified service, parts, and a full-service body shop and collision center. Come on over and see for yourself everything Cropper's has to offer. Located at 1831 North Grand Avenue, Nogales, Arizona. www.croppercare.com, 520-762-6446.
We're back. So, and we're going to get right into the details here. Scott, are you ready?
Let's go.
All right. So the tomato suspension agreement, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross has officially made the decision to withdraw from the suspension agreement, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So let's give some background on what the suspension agreement is. Can you give us that?
So in the mid 1990s, tomato growers, namely out of the state of Florida, complained to the U.S. Department of Commerce that Mexican tomatoes were being imported into the U.S. at below cost, right? Or dumped.
Yeah.
An investigation was carried out, and during that process of analyzing the costs of production in Mexico compared to the cost of producing tomatoes in the U.S. and in the Southeast, and also the cost of production of Mexican tomatoes in different areas of Mexico. During that process and as part of that investigation, the parties were in communication, groups representing the Mexican tomato growers interacting directly with the United States Department of Commerce. And what came out of that was what's referred to as the suspension agreement.
Okay.
So the dumping investigation was suspended, or the potential dumping ruling was suspended. And instead of entering into a system of tariffs, duties, quotas, an agreement was reached where the Department of Commerce and the Mexican tomato growers agreed to a set of rules and circumstances about how tomatoes could be imported into the U.S. from Mexico.
Okay.
That agreement had an automatic, written into it, 5-year review process. And so every 5 years, the agreement was analyzed.
There's a sunset clause kind of a thing, right?
So, correct. And the two parties, the Mexican growers, in the form of multiple growing associations, so representing Sinaloa, representing Baja California, representing different areas of Mexico that grow tomatoes to be imported into the U.S., and the U.S. Department of Commerce would sit down and review it and tweak it.
Okay.
As that 5-year process carried out, the most recent time for that to happen was 2018. So both parties once again sat down to review the previous version, which was the 2013 agreement, and look at what was working and what wasn't working. That conversation occurred to a degree during the last year, and the renegotiation, as we call it, was not able to find a path forward where both parties would be happy.
Okay.
The Florida tomato growers requested that the U.S. Department of Commerce make some pretty significant changes that the Mexican tomato growers felt were not able to abide by.
Like raising the floor price, or
raising the price minimum. The minimum price is really one of the most important parts of the suspension agreement. It sets a floor and says that Mexican tomatoes cannot be sold below a certain price during certain times of the year.
Yeah.
So in many agricultural markets, you'll have volatility and fluctuations throughout the season that is due to supply and demand, and as supply increases, you might see a lowering of the price, the open market price.
Of
and
course.
Anyways, that 2013 agreement was being reviewed during 2018. The parties were not able to find a meeting point in where both sides could come together and agree on a new 5-year suspension agreement, or renewed suspension agreement. So on February the 7th of this year, the Department of Commerce decided to terminate the suspension agreement.
Okay.
And they gave a 90-day notice.
Oh, wow.
And that's all part of, that's legal, that's fair. That's written
that's the way
in.
It works,
yeah, that's written into the suspension agreement. So they exercised that right. What that means is May 6th, May 7th of this year, the suspension agreement goes away, and what ends up in its place is not open market, but in fact a 17.5% duty on imported tomatoes.
Wow.
On the value of the tomatoes once they're imported into the United States. So that is something that we haven't experienced since the mid-1990s when this process began. And frankly,
right around the time NAFTA started too.
Correct. Yeah. And in most fruits and vegetables that are imported from Mexico into the U.S., we don't see anything like that. So it'd be really a unique situation.
Yeah. So I mean, I know that the U of A did a report too on an impact report kind of a thing on what would happen when in the event that does happen. And one of the things that they said is that the United States, and these are U.S. jobs, will lose 33,000 jobs, U.S. workers, and that tomatoes will go up 25 cents a pound, which comes out to something like 790 million a year, compared to the volume that's already happening. And one of the things that's interesting, and this is actually something that's mentioned in Tomatoland, is the difference in the processes. I mean, the tomatoes that come out of Mexico are vine ripened, right? And that's become really, really popular in the United States over the last 20 years. And actually, it's almost 30 years now, isn't it? Right. I just started feeling really old. And that's become really popular, the organic, the vine ripened. And the way that Florida does it is kind of this archaic gassing, where they pluck them when they're still green, and they throw them in a chamber, and then what's the name of the gas? Ethylene gas, and that ripens the outside, but not necessarily the inside as much. So it's still green in the center, but it's red on the outside. So it's not really a fresh market tomato, as the phrase goes, and that's one of the reasons why the tomatoes from Mexico have become so popular. And I mean, is there any way to counter this price raise and these jobs that will be lost? I mean, what are we?
Well, what you touched on in respect to the different growing and harvesting techniques, I think gets to one of the more fundamental arguments, which is, are we really comparing apples to apples? Mm-hmm. As is described in the book you mentioned, Tomatoland, the Florida technique and what Florida has traditionally done with their tomatoes is that, yes, they harvest them while green, they're immature, and then they expose them to gas to artificially begin the ripening process. What does that give you? That gives you a red, very hard, firm tomato. The flavor profile is not the same as a vine-ripened tomato, which began its ripening process naturally while still on the vine.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, we have the different varieties. Mexico has really embraced the U.S. consumer market and the Canadian consumer market for different types of varieties, whether they be grape tomatoes, tomatoes on the vine, beefsteak tomatoes.
Yeah, all kinds of specialty tomatoes.
You go into any supermarket and you look at all the different types of tomatoes, whereas the industry that Florida is mostly targeting is the food service industry. They're looking at those hamburger restaurants that want a very firm tomato to slice, and that's valuable in its own sense. But I don't know if the two should really be compared to each other. Yeah. The way that
I'm reminded of a meeting that we had a couple years ago where we talked about, actually, like you said, comparing apples to apples and tomato to a tomato, and when you're comparing what's imported or what's imported to across the country from Florida and then what's imported to the United States from Mexico is there is no comparison because they're not the same product, exactly like you just said. So why is Wilbur Ross? I mean, why are they making this decision? Why don't they see that it's not the same thing? I mean, they're two different products for two different industries, and the competition that they see doesn't really exist. Not to mention, actually, something that we'll get into later. Go ahead.
Well, I think the Department of Commerce and the Commerce Secretary Ross at this point they're giving Florida attention for a few different reasons. Politically speaking, Florida was important in Trump's election.
Of course. And
he has his connections to the state. So it's on the radar of the White House and the administration and the cabinet. Growers in the Southeast were pushing an idea during the NAFTA renegotiations about a seasonable perishable clause, which would give them certain forms of protection. It would give any industry within the three nations a certain form of protection if they could prove, and it would have worked to carve out specific seasonalities. The issue with that would be that you would have this tit for tat back and forth fight where specific industries were looking for potentially 2-week or 3-week windows, and it would really disrupt the entire trading process because it would adjust trade law for a wide number. It had the potential to adjust trade law for a wide variety of fruits and vegetables throughout the 12-month cycle, and it would really make a convoluted process when I think the spirit of NAFTA and the USMCA is to streamline trading and economics between the three nations. And that seasonable perishable clause was really quite the opposite. So they were unsuccessful.
Yeah.
And so far have been, even though the product, the end product, the USMCA has been finalized. It still needs to be ratified by the three nations, Congress or parliaments.
Yeah.
So it's still not done. And in that sense, there's still the opportunity for some side letters or side arrangements to be made. So we're not out of the woods yet on that.
Oh, okay.
But I think that the inability of the southeastern growers to be successful on that issue during the NAFTA renegotiations kind of brought them into the radar of the White House on the tomato issue. And they said, well, look, we weren't able to get what we were looking for in NAFTA. Listen to us on this item, which is tomatoes. That's I
so
think
basically
the
just trying
progression.
to push their same thing they were pushing in NAFTA, trying to push it onto this.
Protectionism.
Protectionism. Absolutely. Which, I mean, I'm going to mention something that was a policy, a protectionist policy that was implemented over about 100 years ago, is the Smoot-Hawley. You know, I mean, that was something that ended in disaster for the United States. And it was a protectionist policy to protect American businesses, supposedly protect American businesses from this same thing. But what they ended up doing was severely damaging the U.S. economy that led into the Great Depression. I mean, that's not to say that this will lead directly into a Great Depression, but I mean, if you look at the economy, the writing's a little bit on the wall, I guess you could say.
Potentially, but just what is the normal evolution of our planet?
Absolutely.
Interconnectedness.
Absolutely.
Technology has allowed us to move more places, both physically and virtually. The planet is, in essence, smaller.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the spirit of what they're trying to do on these issues, whether it be with in NAFTA or on tomatoes, goes against that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of the same thing as the metaphorical wall. You know, because the wall is a metaphor more than it is a physical structure. And it applies to this just as much as it does to immigration. I
think if we look at the example of Brexit, it sheds clear light on how people can get emotional about an idea of enclosing themselves or restricting movement. Yeah. But then after they sit down and look at the real consequences and have the time to digest it, they say, well, maybe that's not the best avenue.
Yeah, like, what the hell did we do? Absolutely. And I encourage anybody watching right now to look up Smoot-Hawley and find out the facts on that for yourselves. So what are the plans? I mean, you guys still have an opportunity to fight this, correct? To talk to Wilbur Ross. I know Lance just sent a letter out to Wilbur Ross. Lance, the president of Lance Jungmeyer, the president of the Fresh Produce Association, sent a letter to Wilbur Ross, and the FPAA has made some statements. When this goes into effect, and what is the plan to protect your members?
Well, I mentioned there's a 90-day period, and we're almost halfway through it. So we are getting towards the end of this period where we may end up in the situation of that 17.5% duty on the value of tomatoes imported. More than anything, that would put an extreme pressure on the liquidity of importers and the cash reserves that they have. In our industry, the tradition is to sell on credit with 30-day terms. I think that came out of the tradition that fresh fruits and vegetables, produce had to get to the end user before the money started flowing back.
Of course, yeah. So
you have to sell the item to somebody who's going to eventually consume it, and then the money makes its way back through the supply chain. So we sell on credit and traditionally on 30-day terms or near there. And we wait for the money to make its way back through the supply chain before we can get it all the way back to the growers who started the process. The value of goods sold is volatile. We deal in spot markets, and we can see times when products are worth $15, $20, $25 a box for 25 pounds or so of produce. And when you start looking at the volume that comes across the border, In our peak, we're crossing over 1,000 semi-loads a day of
Whoa.
produce here in Nogales.
Wow.
Nogales tomatoes are the number one item crossed through Nogales. So you do the math and you look at the value of tomatoes here, and that 17.5% becomes a huge amount of cash, and it's needed within literally a week of the sale. So at a much shorter time frame than the tradition of collections. So that's really going to become difficult for our importers and our distributors here in Nogales to be able to cover that cost. It's something that traditionally we're not used to, especially in the NAFTA world.
Yeah, of course.
Where, for the most part, duties and tariffs have been done away with, and now we're moving almost backwards in that sense. And it's a new world for us, and I think in many cases people don't really have a real plan of how to proceed.
Well, and let's talk about who this really affects, because I mean it affects the growers, absolutely. It affects the distributors, and it affects everybody involved. But the bottom line is it affects workers and it affects consumers. So you go to the store, you're ready to pick out a batch of tomatoes because you're going to make some salsa. You're going to have some bomb tacos that night, carne asada, make some beautiful salsa for it. And the tomatoes are, instead of being $1 a pound, they're $1.25 a pound. At first, you don't think this is that big of a deal, but that adds up, and it really affects the pocketbook, because what do you eat how often do you have tomatoes in your meals?
Well, I think you have to take a step back. Can you make a bomb salsa out of a gassed green?
Oh, you can't. I don't think you can. I really don't think you can. I mean, you can't make bomb salsa out of gas green, right? It just doesn't have the color.
Nobody's ever tried it.
Nobody. I'm sure they haven't. Or maybe chipotles, something like that.
So it's not just the cost; it's the availability.
Absolutely.
What kind of tomatoes are going to be on the supermarket shelf?
Yeah.
As it becomes more expensive to import and offer Mexican tomatoes, growers, importers, distributors are going to look for other items. Yeah. They're not going to want to expose themselves to that risk, because they may not find the way to absorb those costs or pass them on to other parts of the supply chain. So I think you're gonna see people transitioning into other items. Tomatoes are an emblematic part of Nogales.
Absolutely.
Of our binational trade of our fruits and vegetables. Many of our community members have worked in warehouses handling tomatoes, or had friends and family members who work in warehouses, or in sales offices, or in the administrative side of things, or in trucking. It's driven our economy for generations.
Absolutely.
And what this decision has the potential to do is really restrict and change that. The question is, not only can we absorb the increased costs, and can the consumer accept the fact that they might not have the same access to the same variety of tomatoes and they might cost more, but from the perspective here in Nogales, the question is, what else can we do? What can we fill that void with if we're not importing as many tomatoes? Many other items are being grown at a level that supplies the chain and the consumer adequately. Absolutely. Whether it be cucumbers or bell peppers or eggplant or watermelon, table grapes. So perhaps what we need to do is diversify and look at other items that we can offer through Nogales. But in the short term, I think we're going to see a difficult period, which will affect employment here. And
Absolutely.
We will feel it. We will definitely feel it.
And Nogales, it's in our area that, even when when the economy is doing well, Nogales has had difficult time with jobs, and filling the jobs that not having enough jobs for the people here. And produce is generally the industry that picks up the slack when it comes to that. And this will, imagine it'll dramatically affect that.
So within the produce industry, what we have seen over the last 2 or 3 decades is a lengthening of the season. It is seasonal, like agriculture in many areas, but we've seen a lengthening, and the table grape crop has really solidified the tail end of the season, the carrying warehouse jobs and sales office jobs, and the entire industry through June and into July. And it's really been beneficial.
Oh, yeah.
But that middle part of the season, that winter vegetable deal out of northern Sinaloa, which traditionally was the mover of the industry, if you subtract a percentage of tomatoes from that, we will all feel it. We will definitely feel it.
Absolutely. And more than just at the dinner table. I mean, we'll feel it in our pocketbooks. We'll feel it at the grocery store. We'll feel it everywhere. Now, the last thing that I want to mention, and this is actually a couple of things that were mentioned in that these are quotes from Lance Strungmeyer. And he says, the truth appears to be that leaders of the Florida Tomato Exchange are on a campaign to portray themselves as the victims to trade while leveraging U.S. trade law to corner the market and drive out competition, which they claim to be capitalists, right? And that doesn't sound very capitalistic to me. I mean, I'm sure, fighting against your competition is part of capitalism, but completely doing away with your competition, using U.S. law, using law to push away, to basically destroy your competition, to completely subtract them from the equation. I mean, that's not very capitalistic. I mean, I'm talking to all you. I'm talking specifically to the right-wing Republicans right now, who are very, very much protectionist. I understand why you feel the way you do, but I mean, you do have to look at it. I mean, if you really are true capitalists, I mean, utilizing law to the U.S. government to get a leg up over your competition that's basically anti-capitalism.
The other way to look at it is the growth of the Mexican tomato industry has largely been to serve the consumer's needs.
Absolutely.
The Mexican tomato growers have responded to consumer change and consumer trends and serviced those buying habits.
In the way that Florida hasn't.
To a greater degree than Florida.
Yeah.
Part of that is the ability of Mexican tomato growers and vegetable growers in general to adapt with new growing technologies. Florida, fruits and vegetables were grown in Florida because it was a safe area from frosts in the wintertime.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that they never have a frost, but you were able to go through a few years where there was no freeze. So it gave you a security of supply in the winter months when fruits and vegetables could not be grown in other areas. What we've seen is that with infrastructure technology in the form of shade houses and greenhouses, whether you're using fabrics, plastics, glass, we can create a superior product. We can create it with better control, so limit the amount of pesticides. We can grow it with more consistency, which is what the consumer and the buying end of the industry wants. They want to know, they want to have a better idea of how the production is coming. They don't want to be subject to swings on the production side.
Of course.
And the Mexican industry has embraced those growing technologies in the form of shade houses or greenhouses or glass houses.
Absolutely.
To a greater degree than Florida. So Florida is subject to, while Florida may benefit from the lack of frosts, they are subject to hurricanes. Right? Absolutely. So hurricanes and shade houses don't do well together. And that's one of the limits of the Florida peninsula in terms of building infrastructure of that sort.
Well, that actually brings up something. Another thing that I've done a lot of research on when it comes to tomatoes grown out of Florida and compared to tomatoes that grow in Mexico is crop insurance. The liability for fresh market tomatoes, Florida has received the most money from the government in insurance programs. And that includes premium, which is the government helping them pay for their insurance. And then product buyout for wasted product that didn't get sold, which actually the numbers for that, the USDA does not have. And I could not locate, they could not give me. Those numbers are not available. But I was told by a member of the USDA that those numbers are significant. That is a significant amount of money that is spent on product that's just thrown away. And some of that product is as a result of weather. Now, there's a separate insurance program I know for weather conditions that pay for those. But what's the viability is what I mean, compared to the liability, to the cost to the government compared to the benefit to the consumer. That's
a question, and it depends quite a bit on transparency.
Yeah.
I totally understand the concept of insurance, and I think agriculture is a foundation of the economy anywhere in the world. Governments should protect agriculture because it's a foundation.
Absolutely. But if you're growing in an area that's high risk and high liability, I mean, you should think about moving.
Well, you know, maybe it's represented in the premiums. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, I think that information should be made available to the public.
Absolutely.
And the American voters should decide if that's a good decision on the part of the USDA or whatever entity is providing that insurance.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's a specific account number that I don't know what it is offhand, but that's received the most money, and they're tomato growers. I know that much because it's gone to tomatoes. But there's no way for them to reveal, which I understand. You know, you need to protect your clients and the people that you're. But this, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's hundreds of millions of dollars that have been given to this Florida farmer over the last 10 years, and it's a crazy amount of money in insurance payments. Now this is going to segue right into the most, as Lance put it, beyond ironic part of the whole thing. And that's his words, it is beyond ironic that the growers which grow the largest percentage of Florida tomatoes also own and finance some of the largest growing operations in Mexico. One company that I can think of specifically is Damari. They own massive amounts of Florida and massive amounts of Mexico as well. But they're one of the strongest supporters for withdrawing from the suspension agreement, correct?
They're one of the strong voices, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, would you call that hypocrisy? I mean...
Well, it's hypocritical, but it's obviously a strategy.
Yeah.
And they are working both sides of the equation. They are Florida-based growers. They have a presence in other parts of the U.S., but if they're in Mexico, it's because they see a value to it.
Absolutely.
And they see not only a value in the offering Mexican tomatoes, but it's because that's what many American and Canadian consumers want, are the tomatoes that are grown in Mexico. So they're servicing their client base.
Of course.
Just as any grower should.
So why push for the withdrawal? You know, I mean, if you're a smart businessman, you see the benefit of growing in Mexico. That's benefiting U.S. jobs and U.S. consumers. So why push for the withdrawal? I mean,
what I mentioned earlier about their interests in the NAFTA renegotiation, it could be just an overflow from that mentality of carving out some protectionist policy. You know, it's hard to wrap your mind around because it seems counterintuitive.
Oh yeah.
When you have interests in Mexico, why are you pushing a policy that essentially hurt that industry? Now, I talked a little bit about the quota that would be placed, the duty that would be placed on the cost of imports, 17.5%. Maybe they feel that they have deep enough pockets to weather that storm. And so while for many members of the industry, especially small companies, in Nogales, we have many family-owned and operated companies, which would be very difficult for them to weather that storm. But a large multinational, they could do it. So
absolutely,
it might not make sense to us from our perspective, but from another's, perhaps it fits into their equation of doing business.
No, we've got a question here, and it's one that I knew was going to come up, and that has to do with the treatment of workers in Mexico versus treatment of workers in Florida. Are there human rights issues, I guess you could say, in the farms in Mexico that are a concern?
I think the conditions of farm workers in Mexico have been publicized to a great degree. There was a series of articles in the LA Times 3 years ago or so, which focused on the situation. That degree of publicity, I've not seen it in respect to Florida. Mm-hmm. So I can't personally compare the two. Other than what I've read about in the book Tomatoland, I'm not really familiar in what the conditions are for field workers in Florida.
Now, I know that there was a major, a full association or a group was formed to fight for workers' rights in Florida, for tomato workers' rights in Florida, because there were some major issues that happened, and it's mentioned here in Tomatoland. And again, I'll recommend anybody who's really wants to know the truth, the facts behind this issue. I mean, I recommend that you read Tomatoland. There's some really, really, really good stuff in there about this. And it became this whole legal dispute about Florida workers' rights. And I don't know. I'm not sure how well it's improved. I mean, I don't know what. Like you said, it has been publicized very much, and not to the degree that
the Immokalee workers group in Florida. They've done quite a bit to publicize the issues related to harvesting in Florida.
Yeah.
In Mexico, a group was put together under the acronym of IFORES to similarly address the issues related to agricultural labor.
Now, there's a link to that on the Fresh Produce website, which is www.freshfrommexico.com. Yeah, and so if you want more information on that,
I think the important thing is getting back to the concept of transparency.
Yeah,
and this isn't specifically or only in respect to working conditions. It has to do with all the issues related to production of produce in Mexico that's imported into the U.S. Foreign produced fruits and vegetables that come across the border, whether it be in San Diego or Laredo or here, are subject to a wide-ranging federal and state review to ensure that they're not only safe for the consumer, but legal and meet all the guidelines. And an extension of that process is observing and keeping an eye on how the fruits and vegetables are grown and harvested. So I think there's quite a bit of attention and transparency in respect to Mexican produce, and I would venture to say that there's a greater amount of focus on foreign production than domestic.
Of course, there is, absolutely, and I think that applies to all industries, it seems. Quick saludos to everybody that's been watching. Great interview, somebody says. Van Quinn Iris. Es el ska, dice el Papas Pancho Robles. It's been some really, 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 really good information, really, really enlightening. I guess the best place for people to go to get more information on it would be to go to the Fresh Produce's website, which is www.freshfrommexico.com. Pick up a copy of Tomatoland, which you can find on Amazon. Just the name is Tomatoland, of course, and the author is Barry Estabrook. When was this published again?
2010, 2011, and the research was done and just immediately prior.
The FPAA actually is mentioned in this book at one point, right? Which is very, very cool.
And when referencing the FPAA's website, you can see a list of our distributor members, and I would recommend anybody to Google those companies or go to their websites. Many of our members have their own story to tell and do a very good job of it through their respective websites. And
you have a section on your website about sustainability and social responsibility to talk about the very issues that we just discussed. One of the bottom lines is that Americans benefit from tomatoes from Mexico. I mean, American companies, American workers, and American consumers, as well as Canadian companies, Canadian workers, and Canadian consumers. It's part of this trilateral trade bloc that we live in. And I mean, I encourage everybody watching to find out everything you can about this. I mean, so many people don't know about these things that are going on. It's done in the background. These things aren't really brought into light, but it's something that's very, very important. I mean, whatever side that you're going for, I mean, educate yourself, inform yourself. Do you have anything else that you want to say real quick before we cut the cake?
I would just remind everyone that it's an important issue for the three nations, the three neighbor nations, but without a doubt, it's crucial to our community and our local economy. Tomatoes make up a significant percentage of the commercial trade here in Nogales, and if that trade if something happens to it and it's reduced, we will feel it here, and we'll feel it in the form of jobs.
Absolutely.
And it will affect our local economy.
Great. All right, so we are almost threw the pin at the cake. That would have been bad. So we're going to cut the cake because it is our 1-year anniversary. Scott, as our guest, will you do us the honors? Do we have the knife?
Do you have a knife?
Yeah. All right. And Santos, can you bring us the hats too? Okay. Santos Yescas, as you guys know from his show, is also here with us to celebrate our 1 year anniversary. Scott. Oh. Okay. Wait. Go ahead and put that on. I'm going to put on mine. We got one for Santos and one for Edgardo as well. Happy birthday.
Just to be clear, we're celebrating the program.
The program,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
This has nothing to do with tomatoes.
This has nothing to do with tomatoes. We are celebrating the program, and I'm really, really glad that you're our guest for our 1 year anniversary. Scott's family has been a big part of the produce industry and journalism inside Santa Cruz County for a good long time. His mom, Kathleen Vandervoet, was the publisher and editor at one point, correct, of the Nogales International, and she's an incredible journalist locally, and I've been very, very impressed with her and looked up to her for quite some time. And she probably has no idea about that, but I have. I've looked up to her for a very long time. So I'm really, really excited to have you here. All right, so we're getting the knife. We've got cake. Oh, and you get a cookie. Homemade cookies. These were what? Who made this cake again, Edgardo? Jessica Gallegos made this cake for us, donated this cake for our show. She makes cakes, she makes pastries, cookies, different sweets like that. We'll put the contact information for that inside the comments. Sorry. Sí. Yeah, in the comments we'll put the information for you to reach out to her. We've just got great from Erica Alyssa Dominguez. We know who she is. She does communications for the Fresh Produce Association. Thank you for that. One last question. There's one last question that somebody had for you before we get into this, and that was, what is being done about the eco-friendly packaging and transportation? Do you have an answer?
Well, we're seeing more eco-friendly packaging.
Okay.
In tomato items such as grape tomatoes, and even some tomatoes on the vine. We're looking at packaging that's using recycled product or is more easily recycled after the consumer has finished using it. Ultimately, though, I think consumer preference will drive that.
Of course.
If buyers see a value in that sort of packaging, and whether there's a price premium to it or not, just an issue of consciousness and knowing. And
that's really what it comes down to, is with the consumer demand type of a thing. I mean, and people are leaning towards this eco-friendly thing, and companies have to change to meet that.
In the technological age, there's no excuse for not being able to look anything up instantaneously.
Exactly.
So you might be at the supermarket and you might be able to scan a code, or just take a picture or Google something and learn more about it. So
absolutely,
consumers are more empowered now than ever before through technology, and I think many people will move into more sustainable forms of packaging once they learn about the issues around it.
All right. Now, if you find this issue important, you can contact the Fresh Produce Association, going to their website, www.freshfrommexico. Retailers and restaurants who will be affected by this, wholesale distributors. If you want to know how you can help, go ahead and go to the website, freshfrommexico.com, and contact the Fresh Produce Association. They'll be more than happy to have your help. All right. So now we're ready to cut the cake. Here we go.
I got the knife.
All right. We got the knife. Santos has the knife. Scott, will you do us the honors? Hey, Santos. Tienes que poner tu hora.
Claro. And you need to use this one. Just carefully. I'm not gonna.
Now, I do want to say that I actually have not been here for the full year of We Love Nogales. This was before I even came on board. We had Santos and his show and Edgardo behind the camera. And I'm really, really grateful to both of them for what they've started and for bringing me into it. I'm really, really proud to be part of this, and I'm really, really grateful. Let's go.
And I think that Edgardo should be here or here too. So
Edgardo's got to come over here. And we've also got behind the camera right now taking some pictures is Hector Treto. You guys know he's been on my show. He's been on Santos' show. He was pushing for the Vote Your Main Street thing, and he's a good friend of our show as well.
So, go ahead. And Joe, why you have a different cup?
I don't know. This was sitting right here on my desk. It was sitting here on my desk. I took it. I'll go ahead and do it. Well, that's a big piece of cake.
That's a good one.
Santos.
So I think that I would like to take the opportunity to say that this work I've been doing in the community is very important because it's one way we can let the community about the different programs. We can bring information to the community, to the different sectors of the community, and also it's an opportunity for nonprofit organizations that they could have a space where they can come and give us the information about the different services they provide. Absolutely. So it's another way to approach to the community, to the social media. So
if you are watching, if you're watching it for the first time, if you've watched it before, make sure that you share our episodes. I mean, even if you don't watch the full episode yourself, share it so that this information, these organizations, the nonprofits, the associations, the people that represent Nogales, so that their voices are heard. And I mean, that's more important than anything.
And Edgardo, I don't know if you have anything to say.
Edgardo has to say something.
Pues nada, pues agradecerle a toda la comunidad por el apoyo. Creo que el crecimiento ha sido mejor de lo que esperábamos y pues estamos aquí celebrando nuestro primer año y esperemos que vengan muchos más. Muchísimas gracias a todas las organizaciones que han participado con nosotros. Muchas gracias, Scott, por venirnos a hacer el honor y partir el pastel. Ya saben, esta es una plataforma para toda la comunidad de ambos Nogales y pues no tiene fronteras, ¿verdad? No hay fronteras.
Claro que no.
De donde gusten, aquí estaremos para servirles. Gracias, de veras, de corazón.
Sí, también para agradecer, ¿verdad?, a Nogales Community Development por darnos la oportunidad de estar trabajando pues en este espacio, de incubarnos de una forma u otra para que podamos continuar con este proyecto que, como dice Edgardo, pues es de beneficio para la comunidad. Así que gracias por la oportunidad y en un principio dijimos que era una mejora continua que proponíamos y que íbamos a traer y pues ahí se ve, ¿verdad? Y felicidades.
And now we're going to start the building on fire. Set off the smoke alarms.
So you need to blow it.
I don't know if that one blows out. Guys, thank you so much. Thank you guys for being part of our show for the last year, for part of our programs for the last year. Scott, thank you much for being part of it tonight. Santos, thank you for everything you do. That candle did not last as long as I thought it would. Hector, thank you for being there, taking pictures, and for pushing the Vote Your Main Street, even though Nogales didn't win. I mean, at least we had... Oh, more on that later, apparently. Hector's going to have to come on the show sometime soon and talk about that. Again, get well, bugs. We'll see you guys next week. It looks like we're going to have on my show County Attorney George Silva. So we'll see you guys next week.